So we are running out of time as usual, but I think that this roundtable is essential, it's inspiring. It's important to hear the personal experience of each one of our colleagues. Let's begin with introductions. First of all, Inmaculada Montalban, she's magistrate of the High Court of Justice in Andalusia, Administrative Contentious Division. She's expert in law and gender. She's been acknowledged in different places. She has fostered and coordinated the Observatory of to watch violence against women. She was the first to teach us about gender perspective, so it's an honor to have you here. You have the floor, Inmaculada. Thank you very much, Carla. I'll be fast, but not. I would like to forget mentioning my satisfaction for being in this meeting with such important people, such powerful women with so much future. Thank you to the Spanish Women Judges Association, especially to the President Gloria and the President of the Equality Commission of the General Council of the Judiciary Branch in Spain. One more thing. With us we have one of the references of feminism in Spain, a woman who in the 70s made the divorce law. We have Ana María Perez del Campo with us. I'd like to ask her, to require her to stand up. Ana Maria, we love you so much and we need you. We will always need you. So thank you for being with us. I'd like to reflect on how judges can improve the implementation of laws in the cases that we receive, when especially those cases have a direct impact on human dignity and fundamental rights. So the goal, the purpose of my intervention will be to state how, if we carry out an investigation on how the asylum right is applied to women victims of sexual trafficking, we see that this right is hardly recognized to her. There are very few women in Spain who get this asylum right, although they have claimed that they were persecuted or after alleging that they have fear if they go back to their countries. I've seen that during the first 5 years of implementation of the law, those cases where women victims of sexual trafficking requested the right for asylum, they didn't get it during the first 5 years. So we need to reflect on this. What was happening back then? If we analyzed those judgments, that's what I did, I could verify that, first of all, courts thought that the right for asylum is only foreseen for especially serious cases. And I wondered back then, a victim of sex trafficking who is captured and enslaved by an organization and which is turned into just a good, isn't that just a serious case? That was the first question. Second question, what happened in those judgments to ignore those requests for asylum, something that we already know. There's no enough evidence regarding the persecution that these women suffer due to gender reasons, nor regarding the fear about going back to their countries, and why there's not enough evidence. The judgment said her testimony is not credible enough. It's not accredited enough, verified. It's not verified enough. Why? What else was necessary to acknowledge that right? A right that appears in all international conventions for all countries. It's a right of all citizens. Why? Well, after analyzing all judgments, I got to the conclusion that it was true. We needed an analysis with a gender perspective. In fact, the report of the Ombudsman of Spain 4 years ago said that requests for asylum of victims of sexual trafficking, back then we had quite a few women from Syria fleeing away from the Syrian war and were captured by mafia. So this Ombudsman report said that these women who requested the right for asylum for gender reasons, most of them they're not granted. The policeman does not grant, the police forces don't grant them this right, saying that the situation is not foreseen in the request of right for asylum. But besides that, this judicial investigation, when there is a process, it's very hard for them to be recognized that right for asylum. So formally, we've recognized this right for asylum for victims of sexual trafficking, a right for asylum for gender reasons, and what happens in practice? The practice shows that it's hardly applied. And besides those reasons, there's also a very important concept, which is the concept of defense of frontiers versus the prevalence of human dignity of those women who request for asylum and protection in the face of the horror they suffer when they are prosecuted by the mafia. So if we see this situation, which is the proposal that we can make, the proposal appears in the best practices guideline against the violence suffered by women victims of sexual trafficking. After a debate, it was assumed, I made the proposal. It is the following. If courts consider that the testimony of the woman who demands asylum is not enough, and if we have verified that normally the one who says that it is insufficient because it doesn't fulfill the requisites for the testimony to be credible, we see that those requisites are the same which are requested in the criminal domain, where there is a key principle. With the principle of presumption of innocence. But when talking about right for asylum, we talk about a right for protection and not a punitive right. What happens if we are in a punitive right? We have to assess the evidence. Where do we have that? inorganic law for equal opportunities between men and women, and more specifically, in the contentious administrative division, it is section 60 of this law. What does this article say? If we claim that there is discrimination, the other party must present the evidences. There is a change in the load on the burden of the proof. So we got to the following point. Women trafficking to be sexually exploited is a form of gender violence. That appears in the 3rd article of the Istanbul Convention. It's a way of gender violence, and it's a manifestation of discrimination. That's what international relation says. The recommendation 14 of CEDAW and the Istanbul Convention. And our law says that if the claim is about discrimination, the burden of proof changes. So this is one of the possible ways to introduce in this gender perspective to make this right real. It is recognized by law, the right for asylum for women victims of sexual trafficking. So with the cooperation of you all, I'm sure we will be able to make this right come true, which is needed by many foreign women. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Inmaculada. Vamos a pasar a la siguiente.
Thank you, Inmaculada. And now I will give the floor to our next colleague, Rabba Srikat. Excuse me if I don't pronounce names correctly. She's been a lawyer and now she's a magistrate. Rabba. Okay. Lawyer and magistrate. She comes from Syria. She had to leave the country and now she's living in the Netherlands. She's trying to learn the language and creating a new life there. She will tell us about the situation there with this endless conflict, and more specifically, what's the situation of women and the most vulnerable people. Thank you. You have the floor. Mike, please. In the name of God, I'd like to begin my words by greeting all of you, to Heides, Billy and Gloria too. Thank you for everything you've done and for inviting us. I would also like to greet Vanessa, Susanna, Madam President, all those working in the Women Judges Association for giving us the opportunity to meet all of you here and work together. I'd like to say something that happens in all those parts in the world where there is a war, where children and women suffer from very, very difficult situations.
Ahora. Ya. Mira.
نعم. لذلك يعد المأوى هو من.
So, having a shelter, a place to go, is a very important thing. Let me tell you something about Syrian crisis. It's the most important humanitarian crisis during these 2 decades of the 21st century. Those who suffer the most are the most fragile factions of the Syrian population, women and children. Around 13 million people have been displaced and have left the country, given the war and the attacks with chemical weapons by the Syrian government, and also due to the war. This has made life impossible there and forced all civilians to displace internally. So civil population had no other choice but to find shelter. At the beginning they went to schools, to public administrations, to move away from their homes. However, given the bombings, the hunger, the poverty, they had to leave the country, given the many crises there. When leaving the country, of course, they had no other place to go but temporary camps and camps where they suffer from heat, cold, and the lack of all resources. Can these tents or camps be a shelter for civil population? I'd like to clarify in a few words the suffering of the Syrian people. In the north of Syria, there are around 180 refugee camps. You can imagine the situation there in winter with the rain, the mud. It's really an inhuman situation. Floods swept away all these camps in the area of Arsal, and close to Lebanon there are more than 40,000 refugees. 1/3 of those tents were destroyed due to floods. Not only in Syria but also in Lebanon. There's a continuous suffering due to the human circumstances. They couldn't do anything else. They had to save themselves, flee away from death, but they left their country to suffer other sufferings. United Nations has created almost 150 refugee camps. 50% of them were destroyed by floods, and now with cold and rains, they are in a very poor and difficult situation.
دموع النساء هنا التي لا تجف خوفا على أطفالها.
You can't imagine the situation of women. They can't even protect themselves or their children. They have no life at all, nor a future. This is the suffering of women, because how will these children will grow up with no resources at all to go to school even? Can these camps ensure them some any human conditions at all? Of course, besides cold and heat. Wind, floods. This is terrifying. They're living under those circumstances, and also the lack of food, of water. Many of them couldn't return their homes, nor go into other countries, so they are trapped in those frontier areas or in those refugee camps. So they had to go to the neighboring countries to suffer another tragedy, especially the Syrian women in the neighboring countries, because of the lack of shelter. came together with gender violence, sexual harassment, violence, rapes. Even there is an increase of early marriage cases for very small girls. We've worked in many conferences to alert about the suffering of women, especially girls who are going through an unacceptable situation. Rapes is a daily problem. So we need urgent solutions for that, and we need to focus this problem to try to fix it. So we ask all of you to take into account all these circumstances under which Syrian women are victims, and so that you may try to help them, to these Syrian refugees. We have also to take into account the implementation of Resolution 1325 to help women under war circumstances in order to protect them, especially in those hotspots. The international community is invited to press, to public administrations, to help women, to protect, to give them a voice so that they can get to senior levels of government so that they can make decisions. We have to keep fighting. We must fight. We must help women, to empower them, support them in order that they can rebuild their future. If we can give shelter to this woman, some support, she will be able, without any doubt, to rebuild her future and the future of her children. Thank you very much.
Bueno, pues con esta emoción.
So, with that, we shall continue. We're going to introduce you to the next colleague we have with us. Rava. She comes from the Yemen, although she studied in Tunisia. She's the chair of the First Instance Court. She founded the Association of Women Judges in Tunisia, and she's going to talk to us as well about the situation of women after the humanitarian crisis. I mentioned she lived in the Yemen, yes? Okay. I'll give you the floor. In the name of God, mighty and merciful. In the name of God, Almighty and merciful, I am Rauda bint Mohammed Ariki. I'm the chair of the Association of Women Judges in the Yemen. I'm going to talk about the subject of displacement because this is sometimes harder than refugee status. The Yemen has been affected by the most difficult crisis in all of its history, and the crisis of the displaced people was very harsh because people have had to leave their homes in places where there is conflict between two fighting groups. They have fled to save their lives. They have lost their jobs. They have not been able to continue living in the city where they lived, and so that is why they have had to abandon their homes. Hundreds of homes were destroyed, and they had to live in villages, in areas far from the conflict. Some lived in caves, others in camps where there is no minimum level of dignity for human beings.
فاللاجئين أجتاز الحدود الدولية.
I have studied the subject of displacement, not refugees, because the people that ask for refugee status have reached other countries. They live in a country with a certain structure and order. However, those who are simply displaced, I would say this is more harmful. There are 3 million displaced people in Yemen, and there are 300,000 persons displaced in neighboring countries. And displaced people live in the region where there is a lack of safety and security. We are talking about a disaster. This is a catastrophe. We are talking about 7 million children who sleep each night without having had food. And this is what is happening to the children. They live below the poverty threshold. And this was stated in the World Bank report. 50% of them lives under the poverty threshold. Some go to school, others do not. And the ones that do go to school are receiving an insufficient education. They live far from their homes, far from having a true childhood. Their rights are violated. They are the most vulnerable in society. The children are the ones who most need protection. I'm sorry, there's a slight technical problem.
الوضع كل يوم يزداد سوءا.
The situation is getting worse day after day. There are many tragedies. There's a very precarious situation. There are no health services. The needs, basic needs, cannot be guaranteed. We could talk about the difference of, according to gender, the civil servants could take charge of distributing help. They are not receiving their salaries. The currency, the internal Yemen currency, is losing value, and this has a direct impact on the life of children and women. There are also psychological problems which we can observe. There is fear, psychological disease. It's like an epidemic or psychological illness. Some of them have requested internal security measures, and although some may return to their homes, they have lost their trust and confidence in the surrounding society. There are thefts, violence, insecurity, and all of this leads to the citizens not trusting the state. Some families which have children, and well, the minors are the ones to suffer the most. Some of them live outdoors, and some of them have lost all hope of returning to their homes. A child, a breastfeeding baby, was sleeping next to her mother, and the dogs dragged the baby out and ate that child. There's a terrible economic situation, great illness, dreadful infrastructures. It's very difficult to access health services. All of this instability has led to the system breaking down, and cholera has arrived, and the children are paying the highest price ever seen in the history of Yemen in terms of health, a lack of education, being displaced. Many children died, and some of the camps were bombed, and this caused 8 children to die, and there were many injured, and many of the deaths are due to a lack of health resources. Due to the fact that the hospitals are far away from the displaced populations, they may reach the hospital, but they may die on the way. And there are many problems. The problem for displaced people is much more serious than the problem of refugees, because there is great poverty. There's a lack of dignity for these people. There are women, children, young women have been exposed to sexual violence. On a gender basis.
الاحتياجات المعيشية.
Education is insufficient, and this has led to a lack of opportunities. There are few opportunities for youngsters to carry on studying. Some have preferred to join the fighting groups. This has caused great harm. Some schools are actually used to shelter refugees or displaced people, to shelter them. There are no salaries for the teachers. There haven't been for the last 3 years. There is no budget for reconstructing schools, and this is leading to a humanitarian crisis. There are many problems, many challenges with regards safety, human rights as well. As there is no safety for the displaced or for refugees. There is a prominent role taken by NGOs, but they cannot possibly cover the whole territory due to the fact that certain regions have serious conflict, serious battles between the rival groups. The assistance provided to the displaced people has greatly decreased. There are many recommendations which arise from certain organizations I don't have time to talk about all of them, so I shall have to draw to a close. Thank you very much to all of you.
Bueno, pues vamos a continuar. Ahora es el doña.
We have Saida. It's the turn of Saida Chibili. We have the honor of having the regional director of the Association of Judge Women. She's from Tunisia, and in her role as magistrate, she has always shown commitment to the empowerment of women in fiscal law, in civil law, and fighting for the rights of women. So we're really looking forward to hearing from her. Thank you very much.
ربما لن أشكرها ونوعا ما حزينة.
Well, from my colleague, well, we've heard many things, and right now I have remembered what is happening in all of the Arab countries. Now, we are going to talk about human justice. If we talk about the subject of women and children who have become refugees from a gender perspective, we are going to discover a subject which concerns the entire international community, because the women and children should not suffer in this way. I'm going to try to talk about this subject, but I'm going to be brief because many of the things I was going to talk about have already been mentioned by my colleagues. The Arab countries over recent years have experienced political situations and agitation in the political and social sphere, as well as wars. This has led to waves of refugees and displaced people. People obviously looked to escape. They looked to find somewhere safe within the borders of their country or beyond. In these circumstances, women and children are the most threatened by the dangers. In other words, they are most threatened by this war situation, and the responsibility lies not just with the political parties and governments, but also the international community. So we need to take three approaches. First of all, we have to look at the details. What are the problems that they face? What problems do women and children face when they become refugees or when they are displaced? Secondly, it would be appropriate to look for legislative frameworks regarding refugee women and children. These legislative frameworks exist internationally and nationally. And thirdly, it is indispensable to talk about the measures that need to be implemented to provide protection to women and children within international and national strategies, always taking into account the gender perspective. I do not want to continue for too long, but I do want to say that these problems need to be dealt with awareness and sensitivity to the gender perspective in order to understand and evaluate these problems suffered by the women and children. Also, the children and women suffer violations of their rights, rapes, all kinds of different crimes committed by the border guards, or in fact the men in the camps themselves, the men in the refugee camps. They are always in danger of suffering sexual crimes, and this makes it necessary to provide these camps with protection for the women. Those camps are crowded with people, and all kinds of violation of rights occur just because they are sharing this space with other men who do not belong to their family. Often the toilets are far away from the tents, and at night there's a lack of security, there are a lack of guards, and the refugee women suffer assaults and rapes. Also, women and children suffer many kinds of violence because if you stay in these tents for a long time, relations and the family relationship deteriorates because the father is unable to fulfill his role, protecting his family, providing for his family, and violence increases a great deal. Sexual violence increases, and then we have the forced marriage of children, which also increases. And in the end, nobody reports these situations because of fear of social repercussions in conservative societies. We also know that children, girls, are married at early ages. They are forced to leave school, and as a result, they become poorer, and they need our help even more. These women, these girls cannot report these assaults to the police when they're in neighboring countries because their own situation is not legal in the country where they are staying. So they just have to put up with it, and refugee women do not have permission to work, they do not have permission to study, they have no opportunities, and the situation just gets worse. And what's more, we could talk about marriage of young girls. This doesn't take them out of poverty, rather it makes them vulnerable to domestic violence, gender-based violence and abuse. That also puts an end to their future. We have seen that mortality rates has increased during pregnancy. Often these marriages with girls are not recorded, they are not registered. These girls, as a result, are really vulnerable, and when they have a baby, it's even worse because the baby cannot be registered officially in any place. So we are talking about a vicious circle, which is unsustainable. What we need to do is to study in detail the life of these women in the refugee camps, talk to them and find out their problems, the threats that they suffer and the risks. We need to investigate the reasons behind their displacement or why they have fled. Ask these women about their hygiene and health situation. Questions such as the fear that they have regarding their homes and how women who have been displaced, how do they manage their everyday life? What health care do they receive? What services do they receive, them and their children? What shortcomings do they suffer during this time as displaced people? How can women survive in these conditions? These are subjects we need to look at. First of all, it's necessary to look at the international framework for these people. For the last 40 years, we have seen the creation of legal frameworks for refugees ever since 1901. There was the first Office for Refugees. A lot has been talked about and done looking at refugees and their correct treatment according to these binding agreements. There are agreements that have been drawn up which are binding through the UN, which are not purely humanitarian. Furthermore, we have to distinguish between international law, which is the Geneva Agreements from 1949, and the international law, which talks about gender violence, violence against women. It talks about women even in times of peace. And normally they talk about equal rights for all. In other words, there are many conventions that talk about human rights, humanitarian rights, where they talk about women's rights during war and during peace. But these agreements, these conventions are always insufficient when it comes to protecting refugee women and girls. Because in most cases, the judges, the prosecutors, the people working in the legal system do not have training in those international agreements and conventions. I would also like to mention something about the situation in Tunisia, the importance of the international legal framework Any country that signs the 1991 Convention has to act in line with all of the agreements and has to adapt its national laws in order to adapt to the international agreements, to facilitate assistance, to provide assistance to refugees. National laws will obviously punish crimes and sexual offences against refugees. It's necessary to strengthen the national legal frameworks in order for them to be in line with the international ones. All countries have laws to protect women from gender violence, but sometimes there are loopholes and the women do not always get protection. We need to make sure that we review this subject, and I can say that since 2012 in Tunisia we have been working to promote pass a law on refugees, and according to that law a national body will be created to ensure the enforcement of the law and to study the case of refugees and study their health and social needs. If this or when this law is passed, this will be the first of its kind in the north of Africa and Middle East. I just ask for 1 minute. According to the High Commissioner for Refugees, well, I'm going to talk about Tunisia and the situation there. So according to the UNHCR, in the year 2000, we have 1,290 refugees. Most of them have come from Syria, and that's according to the records of the UNHCR. Some of them come from Syria, 41%. So, as I said, we have Ivory Coast, Palestine, amongst other countries. If we look at the priorities, they are supporting all of the efforts to create a body which will deal with the subjects related to refugees and provide services for refugees, above all, the most vulnerable layers. Right now, the High Commission needs information. It needs $7.4 million, but in reality, it only uses 10% or provides 10% of that amount. It's essential to provide full protection to women and girls and boys, to take into account their problems and treat them from a gender perspective. So I shall finish by saying that sex violence, gender-based violence, is a very serious problem because it's a violation of the basic rights of women. Therefore, we need to strengthen our efforts to work in prevention and take action and to meet their needs and to respect human dignity without any kind of discrimination. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Zaida.
Thank you, Zaida. Now it's time for the next speaker, Jawahar. Did I pronounce it correctly? She's from Jordan, magistrate, has a PhD in law, expert in criminal law, and she will tell us about honor crimes and how this undermines the freedom of women.
أولا السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. هذا هو السلام.
First of all, may the peace be with you.
السلام على الجميع من كل الجنسيات وكل الأديان وكل.
Peace for all of you, for all the religions, wherever they come from all the regions of the world. In Washington in 2015, when we met our colleagues from the International Association of Women Judges, I signed up as a member of this organization. I say that this organization, during its congresses, it's like United Nations. There are many countries all over the world, many nationalities. So, greetings to this association that puts me closer to my colleagues. Greetings to Madam President Susana and Saida, Gloria, President of the Spanish Association. Thank you all for allowing me to come here to Spain to see this beautiful country and its good people. I'd like to talk first about the situation of Jordan women and the judicial life. The first female judge was appointed in 1996 in Jordan. Hekmata was her name. She was chosen to become a member of the International Criminal Court, the ICC. So it was a good choice. It was the first one. Then many other women judges were appointed, 98, 2000, 2003, and now the number of women judges in Jordan, in 20 years, we have 230 women judges. It's an important percentage if we compare the figures between men and women, because in Jordan we have 1,080 judges in general, so it's quite an important percentage. And the number of women judges who have senior positions is important. There is one woman who is the president of a court, who's also a member of the Supreme Council of the Judiciary. We also have a woman who is a judge, a member of the administration court. These are women who even work in the instruction phase, in the investigation phase. Some of them work as prosecutors and as judges, or only as judges. The investigation phase requires the judge to work in not very usual hours. When I was a prosecutor, they called me very late at night, and I had to carry out an investigation for rape cases, and this was not the normal thing. So in Jordan we trust in women judges. We also have a woman who is the director of the Judicial Institute. She's a woman, as I say. And the president of the Children's Court is also a woman, judge. And we also have some members within the Ministry of Justice, some women judges. There are also women judges in the appeal court. And also women judges who are the heads of different court divisions. This is basically the result of a great effort done by the parliament of my country, and also thanks to a women judge in Jordan who's member of the Royal Council in Jordan. All of this was a quantitative leap. There's also a forensic doctor who's a woman, who's a director of the largest government public hospital in Jordan. She's been working during the last 20 years in the same field, forensic medicine. So 30% of women judges in Jordan hold a PhD, 50% of them have a master's degree, or they've done a thesis. This means that the situation of women judges in Jordan is quite well. So this was the introduction, basically. I'd like to say, on top of that, that regarding refugees, Jordan is located in a hotspot. We are in the center of many problems. We are close to Palestine. We have a frontier with Israel. Problems of Israeli settlements, Palestinian territories on one side, and then Syria, the Syrian war. So we are in the middle of all that. But in Jordan, there are no internal problems. There's no internal war. But the location of Jordan in that place makes Jordan a country that receives many refugees. This began with the waves of Palestinian refugees, then Iraq, then Syria, and nowadays there are many Yemeni people in Jordan, Libyan people after all the unrest there in Yemen, in Libya. And although the economic situation in Jordan is not ideal, we live thanks to the credits of the International Monetary Fund and tourism, so then we have not many resources, and this makes the refugee situation even more difficult. At the human level, they are widely accepted. Jordan is a member of United Nations, so we are a country committed to the problems in the world, especially in the neighboring countries. But I've been asked to talk about the main theme here, men and women looking for shelter. The situation of the Jordan woman, we can't deny it, as in every Arab country or the rest of the world. The Jordan woman suffers from the men violence and is marginalized as all women in the world. But regarding shelter, any woman in the world who has no home will be a woman without shelter. If a woman leaves her home, she won't have any shelter if she doesn't have a good economic situation or a good family and economic situation. Traditions have changed. In the past, if a woman divorced from her husband, she could go back with her family, but nowadays things have changed. Anyone tries to make a living, and the woman has to make a living when leaving the husband's home. The great problem in Jordan is the issue of women killing, or what we wrongly call honor killing. For instance, a woman with a sexual relationship which is not legal with a man. There were women who were raped. In this case, the brother, the husband, the father kill her. This is called honor killings, as I said.
المرأة التي تتعرض للقتل بداعي الشرف هي أكثر امرأة الآن في هذه الفترة هي التي تعاني. لدينا
A woman who's killed, that causes suffering. We are different from other countries. If a woman is afraid and leaves the home of his husband, brother or father, once her illegal relationship with a man has been discovered, or if she's found with a man somewhere, the woman has to leave the house, the home. What's the problem? There were no entities or bodies to protect the rights of that woman. A governor could protect, authorities could protect women, but it was quite the opposite. She was imprisoned, but she is a victim. She has no shelter. If she goes out, she will be killed. And sometimes some money is paid to this governor, and he says, okay, she can go back home. The father signs, she leaves, she gets out of jail, and then the father or the family kills her just at the entrance of the governor's office. It's very terrifying. She spent some time in jail, and when she gets out, she's killed. In 2018, happily, there was a law passed to build centers for women who can suffer violence or who can be killed. we have more than one centers now, so this could be perfectly a good solution. We also have two types of women who suffer violence and need shelter. For instance, women victims of human trafficking. For instance, maids at homes, those women who come to our kingdom to work in factories, and they are those who suffer the most human trafficking. So for these problems in 2015, they are given shelter, accommodation until they can go back to the origin countries. Another type is those women abused by their husbands. The Confederation of Jordan Women had a small shelter, a small house, but and they can find accommodation there. According to the criminal code, there was an article that was abolished that said that the raper could marry the victim. And the article that stated that the husband could kill her wife if he found her with someone else in bed, this article, as I say, has also been abolished. This was a quantitative leap for the situation of women in Jordan. Of course, we have more problems in Jordan. I forgot to mention many examples. I'd like to have mentioned many other problems, but time is of the essence. Section 98 of the Criminal Code of Jordan, that article allowed the man, in case he knew that the woman had not a good conduct, meaning sexual conduct, if he killed her, he could be convicted with an attenuating circumstance. I would like to thank you, to thank mainly. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the two interpreters that have conveyed the message to all of you. Thank you very much. To all the interpreters, thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, impactados y maravillados con tu...
We are shocked and wondered by your presentation. The last one will be by Mina Sougrati, coming from Morocco. She is the magistrate of the Administrative Court. She is the president of the Moroccan Women Judges Association and secretary of the International Association. She will also tell us about the vulnerability situation of women victims of violence and children. Thank you, Mina. May the peace be with you. Good morning. Thank you. Thanks to the Spanish Women Judges Association, especially the distinguished President, Gloria, my friend, Gloria. thanks so much to the regional government of Madrid for enabling this conference, and now I will speak in Arabic. I come from Morocco, and I will speak first about the general situation in Morocco regarding the judiciary. In Morocco, there are important legal reforms which are taking place, mainly regarding women. Nowadays, with the new constitution, this implements the role of international treaties. Also, its section 19 acknowledges full equality between men and women at all levels. Of course, old constitutions since 1962 up to the present said the same. However, the new thing here in this section is the second provision that foresees the following: the state will do the best efforts to implement parity between men and women. To this end, a body for parity between men and women is created in order to fight any form of discrimination against women. Why? Because Morocco has ratified the CEDAW agreement. So in this regard, Morocco is committed to the 2030 agenda. There are 17 goals there, 10 of them are about women. All these commitments led to enact new laws and to amend other ones. Now we are trying to amend the family code and the labor code, and all those areas where women need some form of shelter. I would like to focus on how to provide shelter, a home, a safe home for women. I will mention some examples of women who are in urgent need, especially those suffering gender violence, because many of them are exposed to this gender violence by the husbands or the families. Many women very often escape because they want to put an end to that suffering, and normally they are with their children. So we have to ask the following: if those women leave their homes with their children, being poor, what will they do? Who will help them? Last year, we enacted a law on gender violence, and some mechanisms have been created, set up to protect women, especially during the judicial process, with police, with the health care centers. All these sectors have to protect these women, and also during the judicial procedure. So this woman, this abused woman who suffers gender violence, there is a social worker with her, and she will receive legal assistance. However, there are not many resources to provide all the necessary resources. So now we cannot fully protect all women. That's why nowadays many women suffering gender violence go to NGOs, organizations who work on this issue, and they have shelters reception centers for women, and they have centers to listen to them, and they provide them with accommodation and legal assistance, healthcare assistance, and they provide them with training so that they can go back to the labor market or enter into the labor market. There's a reception center, healthcare support, psychological support, legal assistance, training, and counseling for entering into the labor market. Which are the obstacles that these organizations find? Very often the lack of resources, because there's more demand than what they can provide. Many women have to wait for months until they are accepted in those centers. Sometimes they are there for a few days and then they have to leave. And there is another problem which is more serious. Single moms, single mothers. There is an organization, Women's Solidarity, says that every day 150 babies are born with single mothers. This is a very sensitive thing because single mothers have no social support at all. 150 babies are born from single mothers. These women are an outreach for the family, so they receive no support from them nor the society. However, society is beginning to recognize this phenomenon, but it's still a problem, not only at social level, but even for the judiciary, because the baby born this way, it's very difficult for the authorities to recognize who are the parents of that baby. Because if this baby is born from the relationship of with a man, a love relationship, or even a rape, normally the father will deny that he is a father, actually. So it's very difficult to prove who's the father and register that. Although judges do everything which is possible to help the victims. In this regard, associations have an important role to play, because besides assisting single mothers, they counsel them, they train them, and refer them to other services to receive more help. Let's not forget that many of these women have no educational level at all, so there are sewing workshops or these kind of things. And after that, the single mother has to leave this shelter, and in that case, she has to find a home, a new home, in suburbs, in humble neighborhoods, and there many there's the mafia there. So the situation is not easy. It's a very fragile situation. Despite the efforts of all these associations, there is another type of women who are not nationals of Morocco. They are migrant women. In Morocco, after many years of being a transit country, we've become a country that hosted immigrants, a destination country for immigrants. These people come with problems. The sub-Saharan women, for instance, from Syria, Morocco. From the humanitarian point of view, of course, we accept those migrants without documents because they have to leave a very dangerous situation in their home countries. We receive them here. Most of those women are victims of human trafficking and women trafficking. These women cannot report even this to the police because they are afraid to be sent back to their countries, and they are trapped because they cannot even go to police or go to any association because they have no official documents. So quite very often when they decide to leave their country, they destroy their documents before beginning that journey. Normally, these women don't speak the language. It's difficult to communicate with them. Nowadays, we try to take into consideration these women, this group of women. So we have to work on this issue and try to guarantee the same rights for these women, the same rights that are granted to the Moroccan women. In this regard, our association has hosted many conferences to try to fix this problem. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias a
Thank you very much. That's been very moving and striking. I would just like to use this time to talk about the rapporteurs, just to mention them. They are noting down what is said in each session, and they will work together to prepare a document. Here we have, in particular in this session, Fernando Losada Chema from the Supreme Court in Galicia. And we're doing really badly time-wise. One question I've been given permission, well, two questions. You first. I've already chosen two, I'm sorry. We have lunch scheduled and we're doing really badly. Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to say I'm Malin Maliki. I'm a judge in the Cassation Court, responsible for evaluation in the Council of the Judiciary Power in Morocco, and I belong to the International Association of Women Judges. This conference must help us to bring us all together. I'm going to try to be brief. We've heard a lot of information. This is a great legacy in legal terms if we talk about mechanisms for social protection of women in different countries. We have had many representatives, and it's important because we need to understand the best practices for protecting women and children. We cannot separate the subject of women from their children. For Doña Shouaher from Jordan, I respect her in a very special way because she is very affectionate and very cheerful. But my question is for her. I would like to refer to these shelters, these homes set up in Jordan for abused women. Do you not see that that is just a temporary solution? You know, if we build these shelters, this then becomes a burden for the state and needs support. They need financing, they need money from the state. And you talked about the fact that the Kingdom of Jordan has limited resources and many displaced and refugee groups. Perhaps we need to think of a different way and to use these shelters, these homes, as a source of income and use it as a force for change within Jordan. It must no doubt be important to have a Jordan-based perspective for Jordanian women to reduce abuse and mistreatment for the women in Jordania. This must be a priority for the government. I don't know how many minutes I have. 1 minute. Thank you for saying those nice words about me. If we go to the point, that's not the solution. Obviously, in Jordan, we obviously would prefer not to need these homes, but when we have mistreated women in jail, but without a conviction, which is better, to have them in jail or have them in a shelter, in a home? We have no problem with the laws. The laws are excellent. There is no distinction between men and women. The problem is the enforcement of the law and the attitude and the way women are seen in the Arab world as well as the rest of the world. This happens in the National Institute for Women's Affairs. They are trying to implement strategies and plans. This was a solution, a temporary solution. So there is communication with the family and the husband, and the woman can leave the shelter. It's a temporary measure, it's not definitive. We are still working to improve the situation of Jordanian women. Jordanian women live much better than in many other countries. We have scientists, MPs, women who own companies. They have good income. There are micro projects, mini projects. All of this is done to ensure that it's not always men that provide for women. If we compare with the 50s, 60s, we are in a very good situation in Jordan. I think we are a country that has moved away from what is happening in many Arab countries. We are signing and ratifying international conventions. CEDAW has been ratified. We've also signed the Convention on Children. And this means is that we are not progressing as fast as a missile, but we are progressing, we are taking steps, and we're moving up step by step. And we hope that the situation of Jordanian women and Arab women improves. Thank you very much.